about a topic that's particularly important to, I think, everybody that's on the wire. So I just want to welcome everyone. I see a lot of familiar faces here, but I want to welcome everybody on behalf of the Berks Alliance. I'm the current chair of the Berks Alliance. And as you've heard me say before, the Berks Alliance is a collaboration of anchor institutions in Berks County with a focus on community development. We're essentially trying to improve the health, wealth, and education attainment of the citizens of Berks County. And we're particularly interested in making sure that there's an adequate supply of living wage jobs. But more importantly, what we're going to talk about today is that there's an adequate supply of people to fill those positions. So thank you for supporting our programming. Thank you for being with us today. And I'll turn it back to Dave.
Thanks, John. So I'm going to cover some quick ground rules for everybody if we can. As I mentioned, we would like you to keep your microphone muted during the presentations. We would like you to keep your screens on so we can see we're dealing with real people. We will be recording this program. We will put it on the Berks Alliance website, and we will share it with BCTV, and we will send a copy to everybody who registered for the event. We will ask you to submit any comments or questions that you might have through the chat function that you'll find at the bottom of the screen. We will get to those at the end of our presentations. I'll ask the questions that we get. Hopefully we get through them all, but if we don't, we will share them with our presenters and ask them to give us some more feedback, which we will also share with you. So very, very interesting topic about the impact that COVID has had on the labor force. And we're very privileged to have Keith Wardrop from the Federal Reserve Bank in Philadelphia, who's going to present his findings on a national study that he has done. And then we'll have responses from 5 local business leaders about what's happening here in Berks County. So with that, Keith, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you so much, Dave. And I will share my screen. Let's see. Is it coming through okay?
Yep.
All right, well, I unmuted myself and shared my screen, so I kind of feel like it's a win already. But good morning, everybody. As Dave said, my name is Keith Wardrop. I'm the Community Development Research Manager at the Philadelphia Fed. I'd like to thank Dave and the Berks Alliance for inviting me today. I was saying before the call that it's really great to have an organization like the Berks Alliance in Reading as a way for us researchers to get our information to our stakeholders and to start these to participate in these kinds of conversations. I think the sharing of this work is just as important as the doing of it. So I really appreciate the opportunity, and I appreciate everyone attending. So I'm excited to kick off this forum and then to hear from a slate of local leaders, as Dave said, that will comment on what they're seeing in the labor market. Before I get going, I should mention that my views are not necessarily the views of the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia or the Federal Reserve System. So I have about a 15-minute presentation, and it's split into three parts. And the first part, and the first part's the longest, I'll be discussing some recent research that I've released on the supply and demand in the labor market, focusing on non-college workers or workers that don't have a 4-year college degree. And as Dave mentioned, the research is primarily national in scope because that's where the data are. But I do bring in information on Pennsylvania when I can, and the panel is going to really round out sort of the local perspective.
No puedo escuchar, váyale.
In the second section, I'm going to shift gears and talk a little bit about economic conditions facing employers. And then last, I'm going to talk about a new research project that we have underway. And I'm going to ask for your help. So please hang with me till the end because I'm going to need some help. All right. So starting this first section, job seekers today are encountering a labor market that includes a tremendous amount of opportunity, a tremendous number of openings, historically high. In fact, this chart only goes back to 2018, but it shows a number of openings for the last 3 or 4 years. And if you took the chart back to 2000, you would see that job openings have never even approached this level, either for the US, which is shown in light blue, or for Pennsylvania, which is shown in the dark blue. I've labeled the January 2018 job openings and the January 2022. And you can see that in 2022, they are more than double what they were in 2018. And bear in mind that the economy in 2018 and 2019, on the left-hand side of this chart, that was a strong economy. And we're at more than double the number of openings than we were then. So that's in a nutshell, that's the demand side of the job market. But let's talk about the supply. And I think that's a little more nuanced maybe. So how many people are looking to fill these openings? A pretty common metric that we can use to think about supply and demand in the labor market is the number of unemployed people, unemployed persons per job opening. During these strong economic years of 2018 and 2019, you can see on the chart that this ratio is right around 1, both in the US and in Pennsylvania. So in other words, there was about 1 unemployed person for every job opening. During the recession, and that's the section that's shaded in gray, of course, this number went through the roof, right? Because there were a lot of people that were unemployed. There were very few job openings. So that ratio went way up. But you can see it's already ticked back down in both the US and in Pennsylvania. And in January of this year, we were at 0.6 unemployed people per job opening, which is half the level we were at in January of 2018. And you could also think about that as there are almost 2 open jobs for every unemployed person in the state. So on these first 2 slides, I've just pulled down data from the BLS website. Anybody could have done this, right? Anybody could have downloaded this data and created these charts. But where my research adds value, and that's where I'm going to transition now, is that it dissects the demand for workers and for jobs by the level of education that employers are seeking, by the level of education that workers have. So this chart largely shows the same ratio. If you look at that dotted black line, that's again, in the US, that's sort of the overall relationship between the number of unemployed people and the number of jobs. But the blue and the orange lines dissect it by education. So the light blue line shows this ratio for workers with less than a bachelor's degree. And the orange line shows it for workers with a bachelor's degree or higher. And the takeaway message here is that the ratio for workers with less than a bachelor's degree fell between 2018 and the most recent data when I published this report, which was June of 2021. You can see that ratio went from 1.8 to 1.3, but for better educated workers, for higher skilled jobs, the ratio actually went up. So there was a little bit more slack in the labor market for these workers compared to before the recession. After the recession, though, the market was tighter for non-college workers. And so you might wonder why this is true. And I think the reason is, the biggest reason, is that there's a ton of research out there that shows that during the recession, we lost a lot of jobs that were lower wage and required less education. Some of those frontline jobs, jobs in accommodations and food services and leisure and hospitality, and like the jobs that we lost were primarily lower wage jobs for workers with less education. And so in the rebound, those are the types of jobs that employers are trying to fill, right? Those jobs have come back, employers are trying to fill them, and the market has gotten tighter for workers with less education because those types of jobs are disproportionately open right now. But there's another explanation, and it could be, it might not be just the number of openings, but it might be the credentials that employers are looking for when they're filling these jobs, right? So we know that in past recessions, employers have changed their requirements for a job opening depending on who's available to work. So if there's a surplus of labor, if there are a lot of people looking for jobs, employers might get choosier and they might raise the bar a little bit, right? If you have 20 applicants for every job, you can be a little pickier. You can ask for a college degree or more years of experience. But when the reverse happens, when you have a really tight job market like we have now, it might be that employers lower their requirements, right? And they might decide that a college degree isn't necessary because they just need to fill a position, right? And so this next slide kind of gets at that trend. And this is probably a little complicated, more complicated than it needs to be. I'm going to use a laser pointer and hope that helps a little bit. So I compared the average education required in online job postings in the first quarter of 2018 with every quarter since. And so the points on this chart show how the average education compares to that quarter. And the orange dots are sort of for all the job postings. So I'm talking about 120 million job postings over this time period. And For each posting, I assign a number of years of education based on the education employers are asking for. So if an employer wants a high school diploma, I assign 12 years because you need 12 years of schooling to get a high school diploma. If an employer wants a bachelor's degree, I assign it 16 years because you need 16 years of schooling to get a bachelor's degree. And then I take the average. And so what you see is in these orange dots, the overall job market ticking down just a little bit from the first quarter of 2018. We hit the recession and then it falls through the floor, right? And we see average education dropping by 0.4, 0.5 years. And this is the rehiring story. So this is what, like I was saying a minute ago, we lost a lot of lower wage, lower skill jobs. Employers had to post a lot of those jobs. And so overall, the average education in the job market drops a little bit, the education that employers are looking for. The dark blue diamonds, this is after you control for occupation and industry. So basically, for the same or very similar types of jobs, do we still see education dropping? And the answer is yes, but only a little bit, 0.1 years or so. And then lastly, for these light blue squares, which is the most important series, we're still controlling for occupation and industry, but we're focusing on the middle of the market. So I've stripped away the doctors and lawyers because we know you need a lot of education. I've stripped away the lowest, the jobs with the lowest educational requirements. I'm focusing on the middle where employers, where a college degree is negotiable. And you can see that overall after the recession and compared to 2018, requirements did drop a little bit, about 0.2 years. Now that doesn't sound like a lot, right? 0.2 years doesn't sound like a lot. But I think it did open the door for some non-college workers that might have had the door closed to them before. We can't say that individual employers were lowering their educational requirements because we don't have the data to prove that. But we do know they were generally lower after the pandemic began and after the recession. So we wanted to know, how did this affect economic opportunity for non-college workers? And the answer is that the net result of these trends, we have job openings at historic highs, we have strong demand for non-college workers, we have lower educational requirements. And the answer is there was an explosion of job postings that we would classify as opportunity employment, or employment that doesn't require a bachelor's degree, but that pays a decent wage. And that's on this chart, that's what you see represented by these light blue sections in the bars. So you can see before the recession, about 23% of job postings were classified as opportunity employment. After the recession, it's 26, 27, 28%. The height of the bar tells you how many job postings there were. There were almost 12 million in the second quarter of 2021. So not only did opportunity employment represent a greater share of the job postings, but it was a bigger percentage of a much bigger number. So these 5 quarters saw about 2.3 million more postings for opportunity employment than the 5 quarters before. And a lot of that increase is because there were more postings, but a lot of it is, but about a third of it is because of the educational requirements being lowered. All right, so that concludes the longest section of my presentation. I'm going to transition now to talking just a little bit about the economic conditions for employers, but I don't want to pretend to know what the panel knows, and I'll depend on them to really fill in the blanks here. I do want to be clear. I think we should all just sort of level set. Your perspective on the economic recovery from the pandemic recession depends on what industry you're in. So overall, employment in Pennsylvania is down about 4%. And you can see that in the dark blue bar on this chart. And there are some industries that have done pretty well. Transportation, warehousing, utilities, they're up 5, 6, 7% over the last 2 years. A few others are up or just down a little bit less than 4%. But those industries at the bottom, you can see they've not recovered as well as the Commonwealth overall. I'm supposing that the trend in mining and logging sort of predates the recession and the pandemic. But you can see that accommodations and food services, arts and entertainment, these are pretty big industries in Pennsylvania, and they're down still at 12% over the last 2 years. I think it's safe to say that no matter what industry you're in and whether or not you're currently trying to hire, if you're an employer, you're doing what you can to hold on to the workers you have. And that's becoming increasingly difficult in the labor market we have. So I suspect we've all heard of the quits rate. I don't know if I had heard of this statistic before 2021, and I think I hadn't heard of it because it was really boring before 2021. But just as a refresher, this is calculated as the number of workers who quit their job as a percentage of total employment. And before 2021, this was, like I said, pretty boring. In the US, that light blue line, it never ranged or never fell outside the 2 to 2.5%. But you can see in recent months on the right-hand side of the chart, it's touched 3%. In Pennsylvania, it's a little bit lower than in the US, but 5 of the 6 highest quits rates over the last 20 years have occurred in the last 6 months. So it's trending the same direction as the US, even though it's a little bit lower. And the quits rate is generally seen as an indication that it's a seller's market when it comes to labor. You know, I'm a worker, I'm selling my labor. I have leverage now because the market is tight, and it gives me an opportunity to leave a job for a better one. I think it's important to remember that there are stories behind these numbers. You know, that every person in the numerator of the quits rate is somebody who left their job, and the Pew Research Center can give us a little bit of insight as to why workers are leaving. So Pew asked workers who quit a job in 2021 to indicate the major or minor reason for leaving their job. And this chart shows all the reasons that Pew reported. And only the 3 at the top cracked 50%. So only the 3 at the top were selected by the majority of people who quit their jobs. And you can see that it was either the pay was too low, there was no opportunities for advancement, or the workers felt disrespected. And when I looked at this list, my first thought was, these are likely things that were true before the pandemic, right? These don't sound like they're pandemic related. And in fact, Pew said that only 31% of people who said they quit their job, that their quitting was even related to the COVID-19 pandemic. But now, even if these issues predated the pandemic, workers, as I said a minute ago, have the opportunity to take action because the labor market is so tight. And employers have to find a way to address these concerns if they want to retain the workers they have and hire new ones. And it seems like one way they're doing this is by tackling that first reason, that the pay was too low. And this chart shows the growth in average hourly earnings by supersector in the US. And what we see is over the last 2 years, we've seen strong wage growth in most industries. So employers are responding to the concern that workers are voicing. And nowhere is this more true in the leisure and hospitality sector. You can see an increase of 15% over the last 2 years. Now, I think it is really important to mention that leisure and hospitality started this period as the lowest wage sector. It ended this period as the lowest wage sector, even after a 15% increase. And average wages are still below $20 per hour. So I don't want to suggest that leisure and hospitality workers are having a better day. They're still the lowest paid workers in our economy. But over the last 2 years, their wages have grown faster than for any other sector. You can see in the middle of this chart, the inflation bar in dark blue. So inflation is up about 10% over the last 2 years. So while we've seen pretty robust wage growth, for more than half the industries, you know, workers in construction, workers in manufacturing, their paychecks are bigger than they were 2 years ago. But they don't go as far at the grocery store as they used to. And so for an employer, I think I can imagine that, you know, needing to pay higher wages and dealing with inflation for the cost of inputs can be a double whammy. And I really look forward to hearing from the panel after my comments are over. And speaking of hearing from employers, I'd like to just end by talking to you for just a second about a research and outreach project that I'm working on with some colleagues. So this project, it partly stems from the research I just presented, but it's mostly rooted in the fact that folks in my department do ongoing outreach with our stakeholders in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware. You know, I work in the community development department. We promote inclusive growth in low and moderate income communities, and our staff conducts outreach calls constantly with stakeholders, and they report back to the research side of the shop that I'm on, that they consistently hear employers talking about labor shortages and skills gaps. And you know, the work that I've just shared suggests that this is more acute in recent years than it was even before. So we'd like to hear from you. Over the spring and summer, we're going to be conducting interviews with companies and organizations that are having trouble filling lower wage and non-college openings. And during these interviews, we're going to ask questions like, what are your challenges? What are the implications for your company? What are the costs? But we're going to focus on the last two questions here. What are you doing to address these challenges? What's working, what's not, and what else can be done? Because we want this to be a solutions-focused initiative. And we're planning to conduct these interviews in the spring and summer, sort of distill what we hear into a short report, and then reflect it back to the community, reflect it back to the people that we spoke with and others who are interested in what we learned. So if you own a business or involved in the hiring process and you'd like to participate in this qualitative research, there's a link here for an intake survey where we'll gather some information from you, and then we'll get in touch about scheduling something. And what I'll do when I finish talking here is post this link in the chat in case you're interested in participating. So that wraps up my comments. I do thank you for your time, and I am really looking forward to the rest of the conversation.
Thank you. That's a lot to think about. Hopefully people will begin to come up with some questions and comments. We've gotten a couple already, but please feel free to share those. We're going to move on now to we have 5 local people who are going to do presentations from the perspective of their employer, their business. We're a little bit weighted on the manufacturing side. So Keith will be a test of whether or not what you show for the manufacturing side is valid or not. You're welcome, Dan. And but we're going to start with somebody who has a probably very different and unique perspective, and that is Nick Thomas from Gage Personnel, who probably has a broader perspective on how this is affecting employers and workers across the county. Nick.
Thanks, everybody. And thank you, Keith. I mean, the research and the data is very helpful, because I think as business leaders, we all have these gut reactions to what's going on, and the data helps support one way or another, right? We want to be validated. And I think some of our concerns and what we've seen in the last 2 years has been validated by some of what you put together there. So thank you for that. Couple things I want to touch on for everybody. Gage Personnel does support a wide variety of clients. So top sectors, as Dan would point out, and as Dave just indicated too, but it ranges from your light industrial and warehouse folks in manufacturing and warehousing to your professional folks on up. So yes, this all speaks to us, and what we're seeing is not unlike what we saw pre-pandemic. Things were tight. When you see those numbers on the actual number of people per job, I think that's the key factor that I loved to see, because while we know it's tight, how tight is it really? And that one stands out to me. That graph that showed those numbers stood out a lot to me. We are feeling it tighter than we did before the pandemic. And I think everybody that was hiring knows it's been tight. So one of the things that's shocking sometimes is that we're seeing, and I don't know what Keith can maybe draw from this, but we're seeing folks that do have college degrees that are willing and able to go into different sectors. And we saw a lot of movement during the pandemic on this. And people have always kind of made their own decisions, but there was a gentleman that we talked to with a college degree just last week who was coming to us looking for a professional job, has a great job. He's earning $26 an hour. Well, the things we have in the professional sector that he would fit in based on his degree and his skill level and his experience aren't willing to pay more than $22. So you've got a person that might otherwise be available for a different sector that just won't leave the job he has now because he's making 26, and I don't blame him. So we have some of that dynamic going on, and I don't know that that's a huge example. There's probably not a lot of numbers like that, but one of the things I wrote down when I looked through your the document you set out ahead of time, your paper, was what jobs were lost. Were they more essential jobs that were lost, were they more manual labor versus cerebral jobs? Because that was one of the questions that I had in my gut. You know, are we seeing more people that are taking a job because we saw such wage inflation from fall of 2020? You know, if I've been working as a, you name it, for $14 an hour for 10 years, and all of a sudden I can go get nearly any job and have a wage increase, I might just take whatever I can. And we've seen a lot of that movement. So I know everyone's come up. I track some local data for us that's not quite as robust as the BLS data. So I use BLS data to kind of supplement that. But what we saw in the fall of 2020 was an absolute explosion, driven by a few heavy hitters, but that's thankfully slowed down, because as a business leader, I don't know that anybody can sustain that type of wage growth. But if you looked at what I think the perception was publicly, the media helped play into that. So when everybody knows that there's opportunities out there to go get a wage increase, a lot of folks could see the signs posted literally everywhere. McDonald's, Dunkin' Donuts, you name it, all the chains going to $15 or more. You know, every sign said 15 plus. So what did they say when they came into the staffing agency? I want a job that pays at least 15. And it literally mirrored what we saw in the market if you drove down the street. So it's a tough conversation to have when you're talking to manufacturers that are data driven and product driven. They can't necessarily match that out of the gate because they've paid for supplies. The lag on what they can do to bring their pay rate up is substantial. Warehousing was a little bit more nimble with that, and I think that's because they can pass a lot of that on. I'm guessing there, because I don't know, I don't have data on that or expertise, but it seems like they might be able to pass that on a little bit more. So they were able to raise those wages, and that's where we're seeing probably the most, I would say the highest wage growth is in that sector. But to us, the pandemic simply created more layers to what we had normally seen pre-pandemic. There were always people that were chasing money. We just had some different reasons why people might leave their jobs. And I think if we do our jobs right, and when we consult with clients, those top 3 reasons why people leave a job are always things you're going to need to be concerned with. Are we fair? Are we treating people right? Is this a place where they want to work? And the ones that have lost the most, and the ones that we continue to have real struggles in helping to service from a staffing standpoint, are ones that maybe aren't as willing to move any of those 3. And we don't suggest you have to focus on wages. It's kind of, you know, when I talk to people, let's pick what we can control. You know, what can we move, and really just have an open discussion about that. So we know it's tough. Never suggest just focusing on one of those, because if you only focus on one, you're still going to lose a fair amount of people based on the data you can see there. But overall, this is something that we're all going to be in for a while. My nice friend Dan has some good perspective on folks that are retiring, and we hear him talk about that quite often over the last few years. And one of the questions I had for him a year or 2 ago was how many people did retire, and that's a huge part of this. So we had maybe double the amount that were supposed to retire in 2020 that actually retired, and I would presume that we saw a similar number last year. So those are factors now, and that's why we're seeing such staggering separation between the number of jobs that were posted pre-pandemic to the number of jobs that are posted now. There's just so many different layers to it, that you cannot, and please do not focus on one thing. But I don't want to beat a dead horse there. I'll field some questions later if there's anything specific.
Nick, thank you. Very, very helpful. Very interesting. We're going to move on to Cheryl Spangler from East Penn. Cheryl?
Okay. Okay. Can you see my screen? Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes, we
Yeah,
can.
okay, good. So I'm Cheryl Spangler. I'm the Director of Workforce and Recruiting at East Penn. I've been with the company, I'm just gonna say, for a very long time. Most of my career has been in HR, specifically in recruiting. And seen a lot of recruiting trends over the years. But the last 2 years, I gotta tell you, has been probably one of the most difficult. So what I'm going to do today is just go over how COVID has impacted East Penn's recruiting and its workforce. So I wasn't sure if everybody knew who East Penn or Deca Battery was, but just wanted to give you a brief overview of who we are and what we do. So our headquarters is in Lyons Station, but we have distribution centers all over the continental United States, Canada, and Mexico. And we manufacture all different types of lead acid batteries for all things that move, backup power and storage energy, and as well as accessories. Something unique about East Penn, we are vertically integrated. So whatever we can produce ourselves, we try to. And we found that to be very useful for the past year because of the supply chain issues around the country. We didn't have to wait for components for batteries because we were manufacturing them ourselves. So we found that to be very useful. An example was we make our own cases and covers. We didn't rely on suppliers to continue making those battery components. So when I first read Keith's article, I'm thinking, how does a manufacturing company who hires historically for jobs that do not require a degree, how does this pertain to East Penn? So started doing some research and doing some reporting, and surprisingly, I did find that since 2018, we did see a slight decrease in the number of job openings that required a degree. Now, East Penn has not lowered our educational requirements to fill open positions that warrant a degree. Some reasons that I see for the change is we're prioritizing our hiring efforts in our manufacturing jobs. So I see that as a potential reason. And in the report, Mr. Wardrop mentioned that companies are hesitant to fill higher wage openings due to the economic uncertainty. So I also think that is a factor that has decreased us filling specialized jobs that require a degree. So my slide won't move. Well, anyway, there is a huge impact that we have seen at East Penn due to COVID. Our recruiting and retention has definitely changed over the last 2 years. We're focusing more on retention than recruiting. We've seen an increase in opportunities for our employees to pursue jobs at other companies that do not require a degree. I believe Mr. Wardrop called that opportunity employment. So that has caused significant number of job openings for East Penn, including pre-COVID numbers. We are still looking to fill those jobs. And we're continuing to see a shortage in skilled labor. So some initiatives that we've been putting in place to help with retention and recruiting, we increased our wages, increased our shift differentials. There's been some benefit and policy enhancements and training and upskilling incumbent workers has been huge. We've been creating higher level career opportunities for our employees. And advanced technology, we're looking to automate more of our equipment so we're able to do more with less employees. When I talked about upskill training, East Penn has always been really good at training its employees and upskilling. Some initiatives that we've been focusing on is our employee maintenance training program, our CDL training program. We have a manufacturing skills training program that creates learning paths for employees so they can move into higher level positions. We've always had leadership development programs. We have co-op and internship programs, and we do a lot of high school recruiting. So in all, I think Mr. Wardrop's report, our findings here at East Penn really mimic what he was finding.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. Very good. Very good presentation. We're going to move on now to Luke Ashbach from Penske. Luke?
Hi. So my name is Luke Ashbach. I oversee workforce analytics at Penske Truck Leasing. I'm actually really excited to participate on this call for just the networking alone. Nick, some of the things that you spoke about were really interesting. Cheryl, some of those issues that you're facing today, we're also facing, and we have similar programs in place to address. So I see some relationships being built here, which is it's a great program. So Dave, thank you for hosting, and thank you for having me. And Keith, your research was refreshing for a variety of reasons, but most specifically because we assembled a workforce market insights team to take a look at the labor market and the numbers that we were seeing coming out, the publications that were coming out, the media coverage that all of these numbers had backing it. Nick, you spoke about kind of cutting through the mess and cutting through the noise using data-driven decision-making. And I think it's really important that companies have these voices coming internal that are trusted versus having leaders try to cut through the noise or even experiencing confirmation bias from where they're hearing this type of information. So it's really refreshing to see this and read this and also see some of the things that we were seeing in our own research. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the labor market insights team that we formed here at Penske, some of our findings and some of our indicators that we've kept an eye on. And then I'll speak on behalf of Ron Schwartz, who wasn't able to join us today, on some of the programs that we have specifically to some of those roles at Penske. I'll just start though by saying, staffing shortages are not a new issue for Penske, specifically around diesel technicians and truck drivers. We've been experiencing this for the past decade. As we see an older workforce in those jobs and less interest in coming in and filling those retirements. But to speak back to the labor market insights team that we created here at Penske, our leaders, midway through last year, we're trying to figure out, we have at that point in time, there was 5 million people that were considered no longer in the workforce that used to be working. They were trying to figure out why were all those people moving categories? Why are they not coming back? Nick, you spoke to some of the early retirements that you were seeing. A lot of them are those. A lot of them were COVID hesitancy, not coming back. A lot were we see were women that actually exited the workforce to take care of children. And there were several million sitting in unemployment at that time, with over 12 million job openings that our leaders were like, is this our industry? Is it not? How is this impacting Penske? So we formed a team that comprised of HR, staffing, compensation, marketing, workforce analytics, and we even leveraged some of our consulting partners to come in and take an eye to provide some backing to the numbers that we came up with. And that team has been essential at educating our leaders. I don't think we came up with any policy decisions necessarily, in those calls, but we now meet quarterly to continue to educate our leaders. So that information is in the back of their mind as they're working with their functional teams and coming up with policy in partnership with HR. One of the indicators specifically, and Nick, I'm really glad that you called this out as kind of a tee up, is warehouse worker wages increased in the market significantly. And Nick, I think you said the most. I would probably say that's correct. And I invite everyone to go out and look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the warehousing and storage subsector wages. They're up double digits. I think it's 16%. The latest published numbers versus where it was on average pre-pandemic. So that's extremely high, and we saw that as an extreme example, an indicator as to what was happening in the labor market across the board. We also have been tracking that pretty close to say, where's the top? We saw that increasing pretty linearly in the market. Without stopping, actually, until the last couple of months. The last 3 months, we've seen kind of a leveling off effect. And Nick, again, I'm going back to your points earlier. I hope it is the top, because to your point, no one can sustain that increase, and it obviously continues to feed the inflation problem that we're facing now today too. So we dug into that, and we came up with similar results, right? We saw McDonald's posting wages at $15 an hour, $20 an hour. We saw sign-on bonuses across the board, which is a big attractant to people who may not have had the greatest day. And we saw a newfound education of our workforce, right? Everyone had data at their fingertips. All of these companies that normally we wouldn't see as competitors in the labor market, publishing wages that people were now considering and reassessing their job as a warehouse worker to say, well, McDonald's doesn't sound too bad at $20 an hour with the sign-on bonus that comes across the board, and I don't have to work in a freezer. Gig workers, opportunities with Uber, I think all played a role. So we kind of took a step back and we've been reassessing what our market is when we're comparing our wages up against quote unquote market. It's not just the warehouse anymore. It's the wider, broader market and the trends that we see there. Warehouse specifically, it plays a role with the increase in e-commerce, Amazon expanding, adding warehouses, which require fleets of people to come in and run and keep up and running. So that sector, which we have several thousand warehouse workers and warehouses across the country, that was of particular focus to us. So it's influence policy. We've more frequently looked at wages when we're comparing against market. We've also increased shift differentials, compensating certifications where it makes sense. We've looked at the comp philosophy. The fight for 15 doesn't seem relevant anymore. What is a living wage? Trying to define that for our people. Now, to Nick's point, in passing the costs along to the customers, especially when it comes to logistics and to warehouses. Yes, there are commercial agreements in place for those, but customers aren't just signing up to also take on the costs, right? So HR has been very engaged with educating the customers on all of these insights to say, hey, this is what we're seeing. If you want us to support you, we're also going to have to increase wages, and those therefore do pass through. We're seeing it now, the pressures on our union shops, through the market research, and we see several studies published that increase in union wages and union contracts follow the increases that happen in the non-union sector. So 2022 and 2023, the next 2 years, as those contracts expire, that's going to put more pressure on those union negotiations in particular, because they're going to want a piece of the pie. So, what have we done? We've hired more than ever in 2021 compared to our history. We have more open positions today than we ever have been. So there's the hiring piece, and then we're obviously focused on retention, right? That's a huge focus, keeping the talent that we do bring on board. So we've reinvested and re-energized onboarding and ambassador programs. We do have some predictive analytics that's playing a role in marshaling resources to where we need to focus. We're pushing retention efforts at the location level because that's, supervisor advancement opportunities, flexible schedules, that all plays a role. And that's what we're seeing in our exit interviews come up again and again. So we want to address those for our people. Hybrid work, remote work, everything that everyone is probably doing on here in particular, we're focusing in on investing a lot of time and resources in. So on behalf of Ron, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the specific programs that we're doing for some of our key roles. With technicians, I think Cheryl spoke to this. We're doing similar partnerships with Skills USA, Tech Force, some of the high schools, educating and trying to build out that workforce for tomorrow. With drivers, we're not adjusting or doing anything in-house yet to train drivers, but we have had success recruiting from the military and pulling from that experience. With our call centers, it's a shift in focusing in on attitudes rather than experience, bringing in sharp talent that's trainable, coachable. Within IT and those specialized roles, especially in Berks County, because that's where we're headquartered, it's very hard and the talent is very slim. We've seen Silicon Valley companies and the West Coast companies expand their recruiting efforts across the board because everyone wants to work remote. It's preferred, especially for IT and specialized roles. So that's continuing to play a role in ours, but we're partnering with different programs. We're investing in mentorships, job leveling, training, and a few partnerships to help that fill that recruiting cycle. And the last thing, and Ron would talk your ear off about this, but he's invested and built centralized hiring centers that have really optimized the hiring flow, pulled the efforts off of the manager, shared candidates where it's needed, and really optimized that within the driver warehouse and maintenance space. So happy to talk more, but I'll leave some extra time for the other panel members.
Thank you. Lots of good stuff you guys are doing. That's really interesting. We're going to move on. Ted Freeze from EnerSys.
All right. Thank you very much, Dave and John, for inviting EnerSys today. Keith, I thought it was an excellent presentation. Really got a lot out of that data. And I would echo and reinforce, if you will, what Cheryl, Luke, and Nick have shared with us so far. If you don't know EnerSys, we are the world's largest industrial battery manufacturer. We are global. We've got 10,000 people globally. And I would also just share to the group that these labor issues are not specific just to the US. This is occurring across the world. It's probably a little heightened in the US given our employment relationships and lack of contracts, but without question, human capital is a big deal, and I would highlight Dan Fogerty as well. We've known for quite a while these waves are coming, and they're certainly here today. I'm gonna pick on just a couple of key areas and make mine a bit shorter here, rather than go through some of the same things. I'm gonna break it into two types of hiring, really focused on more direct labor and hourly. And then speak a bit about salaried. And, Keith, I think one thing that struck me when I looked at your data, that I want to talk about on the salaried side as well. So I'll get to that in a minute. When it comes to hourly, there is no question that there are not enough workers in that space. And we as EnerSys have really taken, a few ways to address that issue. First and foremost, you have to understand where you're at in the market. I think Luke talked about how your competitors yesterday are not your competitors today. It's very accurate. So without question, we have been raising rates to be competitive and to get people to work in an environment that is not, highly flexible from a schedule standpoint and not always as desirable as a retail type establishment. So that is absolutely the case. You've got to be at that level. But the second thing we are doing, which is really focusing on retention as well with our hourly employees, is just a much greater focus on what we call being the employer of choice locally. So that's not just your wage and benefits, which have to be there, but it's really the environment they're walking into. Is it welcoming? Are those employees truly appreciated? Do they feel valued? We had an exceptional experience in the start of COVID. We did a great job with safety. We had no issue with retention. We had no issue with people coming to work. We remained open. We provide essential products, but certainly since that time, this is just, an absolute key to keeping hourly folks. Now, if I switch to salaried, we did something else that I think is maybe a little more out than some of the orgs. We very early on, when the return to work possibility came into play, we took an aggressive stance and gave our managers the freedom to work position by position and identify with that employee what schedule was optimal for them. So whether that would be 100% remote or 100% on site or some type of hybrid arrangement, we did it on a case-by-case basis, and it's helped our retention immensely. We've had a little higher turnover on the salaried side of our business, but nothing close to what I've heard from many colleagues. From a recruiting standpoint, the largest benefit for us has been that very same approach in positions that can be remote. We have found when you recruit at a national level and you're open about allowing people to work from home or wherever they live, your pool increases dramatically. And just to give you a sense of that, we've hired well over 100 engineers in the past 12 months at budget, no issues. And these are very high-tech engineers. These are firmware engineers, electronics experts, lithium battery experts, et cetera. So flexibility is massive on the salaried side of the market. And I would just offer that to my colleagues and my competitors as you look to how to fill in that area. And Keith, just coming back to my other comment, I think you may find some of the unemployment, the lowered employment in Pennsylvania you're seeing, maybe organizations like EnerSys, where previously we would have had 100 engineers in Reading, no questions asked. Now maybe we've got 25 and 75 are working remotely. So that may be an interesting area to explore, and I'll end my comments there, Dave.
Great. Thank you, Ted. Very, very good, very helpful, thoughtful stuff. And our final local presenter is Stacy Miller from Reading Truck. Stacy, you're on.
Wow. So no pressure, right? Those were some exciting presentations. And you'll find that some of my material could be a little bit the same, but I'm going to take a little bit of a different spin on it. So I am not a connoisseur at doing the Zoom thing, but I am going to share screen or attempt to. I've got just a few slides for you. All right. And I do slideshow, help me out here. There we go. I'm also going to take myself off video so I don't freeze with my mouth open and then have to see someone in the chat tell me turn your video off. So give me a moment to do that. Okay, so for Reading, the pandemic took several phases for us between 2020 and today. We didn't see a lot of impact to our salaried exempt or non-exempt workforce. We didn't need to change our recruitment strategy or looking to reduce any educational levels to attract talent. But where we saw the biggest impact was with that production skilled and unskilled classification, for sure. And we continue to see that impact. So before I share our perspective, I want to give you a little information about Reading so you know who we are. And my slides aren't changing. Oh, there we go. All right, so Reading Truck, obviously we are headquartered here in Reading, Pennsylvania, and we have been for a very long time. We recently went through a rebranding. So many of you may know us as Reading Truck Body, or even going further back, Reading Body Works. With our growth and our acquisitions throughout 2020 and 2021, we just truncated that now to Reading truck, right? So we're a manufacturer, upfit utility bodies, plants in Reading and Claremore, Oklahoma, which are our largest workforce sites. And then we upfit across 18 sites all the way across the United States. So if you've ever been behind a truck and you see just the word Reading on that tailgate, you can say that's a Reading truck body. And equally to the other presenters, we have had challenges all the way across the US. Every state has the same amount of challenges. Doesn't matter what region. We go now all the way over to the West Coast. And it is something that is unprecedented and nothing that we've seen before. Approximately 60% of our workforce consists of production skilled and unskilled labor. So this is the group that I'm going to speak to today. I'm going to share you a little bit about our experience and our journey. So when we look at 2020, fear for us consumed our workforce. The fear of, it was an uncertain time. So fear of losing jobs, worried about security, how to deal with school closings, and seeing empty grocery store shelves, that has to scare anybody for what's going to be happening in the future. We didn't shut down. We had plenty of work. And I've got to say, during that particular time, because of some of the fear factors, we saw attrition rates stabilizing. But then came UC and stimulus money, and it totally changed and created a new challenge for us. So we had a significant amount of workers feel that they could stay home with their children impacted by COVID closures and collect their UC and the additional 600 or 300. And it just became a problem for us. The other thing that we saw, which was very interesting, is with our senior workforce that may not have wanted to retire yet, may wanted to stay in it a couple more years. We started to see them just throw the towel in and say, you know what, with all of this stuff going on, I'm just going to retire now and move on. After that, the flurry of advertising, and I know we all have seen all of the billboards, the lawn signs, the grass flags, sometimes 3 or 4 flags on the side of the road with multiple employers. This created a need for us to change our advertising and recruitment strategy. So the fight for labor escalated, starting rates beyond anything I have seen in my career. And I must say, I've been in HR for, let's just say, for a very, very long time. I've never seen anything like it. Right? So the increase in starting rates impacts not only that new hire, but also internally for our current workforce. And you need to find some level of internal equity. So we have also gone to focusing on retention of talent. We talk about that building of a relationship. And if you really have a strong relationship with your employer or your manager or your supervisor, you're not going to jump for that extra $1 or $2. So we've attacked some of these challenges in just a few ways. We've revamped our recruiting strategy. We've partnered with our marketing team to do it smarter and to find better bang for our buck. It was necessary for us also to review market pay rates and roll out adjustments quickly to keep up with other employers. But just not that only. The new hire rates had to be somewhat in line, of course, with our internal folks. So we went through and did full market reviews, full adjustments across the board, and then did one additional thing to keep people interested in other opportunities. We took our production jobs and created internal tiers. That gave opportunity for faster movement within the range. And within those tiers, we created skills and competency matrix so that not just the employees, but also the supervisors could see where the gaps were and where folks needed to get to in order to change up their tier and obviously then change up their pay. We did increase the sign-on bonuses and referral bonuses, being more in line with competition, and added in a service bonus because when you start to give sign-on bonuses to production and hourly folks, the next thing that circles back, unintended consequences, right? Our senior workforce are going, well, hey, you're bringing in new hires that, they're getting bonuses. And, what about us? We've been here for a lot of years. So we created a service bonus kind of system, and it was based on tier, based on a percent and years of service. We also started to work with our leadership team on those emotional intelligence skills necessary to build that tighter relationship and increase loyalty, discouraging someone from jumping ship just for that extra $1 or $2. We are continuing to find ways to increase those soft skills as well. And now, and importantly too, right now that COVID restrictions are at their lowest, we can rekindle the engagement committees. We can pull people back together for picnics and events and not worry about the zones and the barriers and all of that unfun stuff, and start putting the fun back in work. We want to reconnect our team members with each other to again strengthen relationships. So for us, it's going to be interesting to see how 2022 and 2023 continue to change the labor market landscape and how we're going to find creative, thinking outside the box ways to attack the next one. So that's what I have, gang. If there are any questions later on, just feel free to ping me. I hope this gave you a little bit of an insight into who we are and the challenges that we've had with COVID that also, to a large degree, tie with the study.
Great. Thank you, Stacy. We're going to ask you to stop sharing screen, and I'm going to go back. And Keith, I don't know whether you have any reaction to what you've been hearing from our local people and how it relates to what your research did, but we'll give you a chance to follow up.
Sure. Thanks, Dave. No, I'm just blown away by the quality of the presentations and all the good information they shared. Whether the presentations were formal or informal, they were just full of good data for me. I have 2 pages of notes that I've been taking as everyone's been speaking. I thought it was interesting. I think almost everyone mentioned wages, and that's clearly that came through in the data that I shared, and it's clearly an issue. One thing that I can't know from the data I have at my fingertips, but hearing everyone talk about how they're not just competing for workers in a way that they haven't before, but who they're competing against is different. And I think that's really fascinating. A number of people mentioned retirements, and I think we've seen maybe 2 or 3 million additional retirements than we would have expected based on baseline trends. So that's clearly manifesting in the region. And then Ted mentioned, and I think this is really fascinating too, that Reading workers no longer have to live in Reading, right? And so, in one way, competition is greater, but at the same time, maybe your solution set is a lot broader, right? You can hire someone in California, and I don't know the extent to which that's going to translate to the types of jobs that my research is focused on, that my department is focused on, sort of the lower wage, non-college jobs, or if that's more for the engineers. And I'm sure it would also be true for, say, customer service or call center jobs, those sorts of things. But I think that would be something fascinating to look into, to see whether these opportunities to hire someone across the country really is only relevant, if it's really only relevant for, your college educated and above higher wage professionals. So I got a lot out of this. Thank you very much.
Good. Thank you, Keith. I'm going to run through some of the questions and comments that we've gotten. Feel free to submit more if you would like. One early on comment was, if educational requirements can be adjusted, is it really a requirement?
Dave, I'd be happy to jump in on that. That one kind of caught my eye, and I would just say anecdotally to Keith's research and that question that we absolutely are far more thoughtful about what the key requirements are for a given job. And I have no question that in cases, we've removed elements like 4-year degree and substituted, skill and experience type options. So I don't have any doubt in my mind that in some cases our requirements are less than what they were pre-pandemic.
Anybody else? Keith, do you want to weigh in on that?
I'll just say that, you know, there's a school of thought that sometimes for jobs where it's, you know, where it might be negotiable, that sometimes it's used as a way to screen applicants out, right? So if you don't raise the bar, you might get overwhelmed by the number of people who are applying for a job. And if you maybe layer on an extra credential or two, like a college degree, then you don't have to sift through as many applicants. And maybe you think that a college degree is a proxy for some sort of soft skills or critical thinking or problem solving or something else that it may not be a proxy for in the first place. So I think that there is a school of thought that if you can hire for skills and not for degrees, if you can, you know, test candidates on what you need in the job instead of sort of looking at the first line in the resume, then you may be happier with who you bring in the door. So it's interesting to hear Ted say that that's been his experience.
Any thoughts about what the impact of moving this way of lessening the educational requirements or more focus on skills based credentials rather than academic credentials? What kind of impact is that going to have on higher education, on our colleges, our community colleges? Any thoughts about that? I know that's sort of tangential, but it's related to what we're talking about here.
You know, Dave, I may be wrong, but the math is so dramatic right now, the gap of just available workers to available jobs. I'm not sure it's going to translate quite that directly. I think we just need more people, and we absolutely are using capital, artificial intelligence, and other means to take the human element out of our work. So I think you're going to see that more so than maybe the other.
Okay. Anybody else want to? Several of you talked about moving to increased automation, and you just sort of alluded to that, Ted. How much of that is going to be the strategy in terms of dealing with this labor force challenges? And what types of skills does that require? Does it change the game?
Well, again, to your point, so I can tell you that certainly some of our efficiency capital projects that were planned, have been changed, where we've chosen at times to take labor out before we look to increase line speed. And in a perverse way, that means we need a little more technical talent to install and run that equipment. So it's without question, our capital allocation strategy is much more mindful now of the labor element than it had been 2 years ago.
So that increasingly will be a strategy that some of you may employ.
Well, and Dave, if I may, I've done a fair amount of guesswork with what I do. And it stinks, which is why I love when data comes along. But with doing some work with the high schools and workforce development and BTI and RAC's STTC program and you name it, the CTCs, I keep coming back to this idea that the employers and the educational system are still not enough in tune with each other. And we need to understand from an employment perspective that the educational system cannot move overnight. So if we have needs that are coming down like this, that we've known for 30 years, we do have some onus on us as employers to get in the conversation and tell people what we need. Because if we don't change what the schooling looks like, the skills gap will forever be there. And I can't say that enough. I see some head shaking. Dan Fogerty's been doing it for a while and spent some time in manufacturing, right? But the more we can get together on these topics, and I've most recently been working with Wilson's team over there that are career advisors and internship coordinators and things like that. We have fantastic people in place on the ground. What's not in place are enough conversations about what we need and how we bring people up to speed with even soft skills. I mean, the teachers are teaching curriculum, and yes, soft skills will come along and they might learn it in college, but I'm a fantastic example, and so is my wife, that we certainly overpaid for what we got on that diploma. And we're probably going to see a lot of students, because there's plenty of parents that are in my situation. We're going to see a lot of students that don't go that route coming forward. So they're going to be looking at other options. So what options are those? And as the employment community, if we don't drive some of that decision making in telling them what we need, we're going to lose out on a lot of that.
The some of these trends were, as Keith mentioned, and some of you talked about, some of these trends were sort of there before COVID hit, but COVID hit really quickly. And it looks like most of you were very, very quick in terms of how you moved to adapt to what you were facing in terms of challenges. How hard was that to do? What obstacles did you face in trying to make those changes that quickly? Anybody? Cheryl, did you have to do anything quickly?
Could you repeat the question? I really didn't hear.
The COVID thing hit so quickly, so suddenly, and it disrupted things pretty significantly. Did you, and it sounds like all of you adapted fairly quickly. The resilience, I think, was what I was hearing from so many of you was pretty incredible. How quickly, you had to respond quickly. How quickly did you have to respond, and what obstacles did you face in trying to adjust and adapt that quickly?
Yeah, we had to, March 20th, 2020, we all had to adapt pretty quickly when we were asked to shut our 10,000 employee company down, letting them know. And then a couple of days later, they all had to come back to work. And there was a whole lot of things that needed to be done to bring everybody back. Safety policies need to be put in place. We needed more people to help us clean the plant facilities. There were a whole lot of things that needed to be looked at. Thankfully, our executive team was quick to put everything in place that we could bring everybody back in a timely manner, get all the production up and running. So yeah, we turned the switch on and off pretty quickly, and then ramped up our production at a pretty fast pace to meet our customer demands.
Stacy, go ahead.
I'm going to agree with Cheryl. You know, at the time when March 2020 came, you know, we were working on two different paths, not only reacting to some of the labor situations and team member situations, but also reacting to COVID protocols, CDC guidelines, protecting our workforce, putting up zones and barriers and, you know, health screening. So it was running on a parallel path. But now that things have dropped off, you know, where I saw it was actually pretty impressive to watch our recruitment or talent acquisition team. We had to react to speed. You know, we used to call it speed to market. Now it's speed to offer and get them in, right? So it could, because and it went not only just for the production hourly that I spoke to earlier, but also for salaried and office hourly crew. If you didn't get that offer in front, or a hiring manager drug their feet a week or two during the interview process, that candidate was gone. It was absolutely gone. So we had to react very quickly to our hiring onboarding techniques so that we didn't lose good candidates out there to Ted and to Cheryl. And to Nick.
And I'll echo Stacy's comments. We had a, you know, I'm going to just estimate probably a 20-day-ish period to hire hourly workers. Now, I mean, we hire hourly workers typically within 24 to 72 hours of meeting them. You know, so it's the offer process is dramatically shorter, and the onboarding time to onboard is dramatically shorter than it was 6 months ago.
Agreed.
Keith, I don't know if you did this, but in the data that you've looked at did you look at gender as a factor in terms of types of employees and types of work, and whether there was a gender difference?
You know, I didn't, and I was actually just responding to the question in the chat about childcare.
Right, that's what I was going to get to next.
You know, I do think that it is, you know, and I was going to post a link in the chat to a suite of materials that a colleague of mine has produced, suggesting that there are still real problems and real gaps in finding accessible, affordable, high quality childcare. I can't speak to any numbers on it in terms of, you know, what percentage of the workforce is being sort of held back because of the issue. I've seen a couple of stats, one suggesting that it was women with young children in particular that have been affected, and I mean, that have been less likely to rejoin the labor force, which might suggest that childcare is, you know, one of the reasons for that. I did see something just today, though, that suggested that it's more about education than gender. That and it was on the Brookings website, if anyone, by Claudia Golden. But her analysis suggests that if you look at labor force participation today versus before the pandemic, regardless of gender, if you're highly educated, you're, again, generally back participating at the level that you started. But with workers with less than a college degree, there's still a gap. So, you know, for every individual household and situation, it's going to be multifaceted. And I'm sure there's data that would point in both directions, you know, whether it's gender or education. But I will post a link, like I said, to the suite of materials on accessible and affordable childcare that my department's produced.
Have any of the rest of you experienced childcare and access to childcare as being a challenge for retaining workers or attracting workers?
I can go on record with this because we see a broad range of folks that is absolutely one of the layers that has come into play for staffing firms across the country, not just here. And it's at all levels. And I think one of the main things that we all need to keep in mind too is you're talking about families that have had to make some difficult decisions on how they're going to run their house. So it's not just young ones. I mean, my kids are 7 and 11. We've changed how we've done things. They're not in daycare anymore. They were doing before and after school prior to the pandemic. They're not in that anymore. So, you know, that's just a personal example, but many people have changed that, and many people that come through our doors, that is one of the main concerns when they sit down with a recruiter and they want to talk about how they can do full-time work or part-time work, whatever they're looking for. But how can they do that around the schedule that they have with whomever they've lined up to help with that childcare? So again, to Ted's point on flexibility, if you're not having this as part of your flexibility conversation, you need to, because this is a key component to where people are going to fit in your organization. And no one wants to miss out on a good employee because they weren't flexible on this issue.
It sounds like several of you moved to deal with wage issues. Some of you have moved to more remote working, to automation, but it sounds like all of you talked about improving the workplace culture as a strategy to attract and retain. And I'm sorry about my workplace culture right now. But do you want to amplify on that a little bit about why you did that, why you thought that was important?
And Dave, can I chime in too with like a follow-on question, because I wanted to ask something very similar. You know, everyone talked about wages, but almost everyone also talked about other things they were doing. And I was wondering, to what extent do you feel like practices have changed for good, or was this just sort of a crisis response? And maybe the things that you've implemented to bring workers in and retain workers, maybe they're temporary and may go by the wayside as things maybe normalize a little bit.
I'm gonna let somebody else answer, but just to chime in slightly, we did see some hazard pay was a key term that we saw a lot of, which was meant to be a term that most people would understand was possibly temporary. It kind of gave employers a way to temporarily increase a wage and perhaps not do it the rest of the time. So that's one thing. We've also seen those sign-on bonuses come and go, increase, decrease here or there, depending on the company's needs. But I'm sure some of these other folks that have specific examples can help us.
Luke, tell us about what you guys did and why.
So, I mean, I think Penske in general has a really, really good culture. There's a lot of people at Penske that have very long tenure with the organization, and there's a reason for that. You know, we get a lot of good commentary from even new hires about their experience compared to their prior employer, right? And I would say that it was emphasized and re-energized all of the programs that we had in place before as a result of COVID-19. But I will say it's not temporary for us. I think we see the long-term benefit of it, and I'll comment that we're investing a lot in technologies to support a lot of these new processes and procedures that support the candidate and the employee experience while they're with us, and to support the programs that we have in place, especially as it comes to onboarding, mentorship, and retention issues. I know we're also investing a lot of time and resources into our compensation philosophy in general. It's probably sparked by COVID, but I don't see it ending anytime soon. At least I hope not.
Good. Well, there are some other questions that were raised. One about transportation and transportation to work and whether that was a challenge. The seasonal childcare versus the daily childcare was raised as an issue. I'll share those with people. Several of you talked about workers feeling more empowered. I know that there has been a sort of a spike, quite candidly, in unionization and organization and organizing some places that had historically not been organized before. So some transformations in terms of the power of workers. Have you felt any of that, seen any of that? Cheryl, Stacy, Luke? No?
So I do partner with the labor relations team here at Penske to support costing and their bargaining prep and such. But we've seen actually some decertifications come through as of late. So actually kind of going in the opposite direction. I know it's a pressing issue across the board, and we have a very robust labor relations team, and I think a lot of the programs that we're investing in now on to enhance the associate experience while they're with us, and I think our people generally see that with the amount of investments and time that we're putting into our people, that it's actually I don't think we've seen a huge spike in that regard.
Okay, well, we're getting close to the end here, and I'm going to, one person several of you mentioned, I know I have to call on him, is Dan Fogerty. So Dan, quick, any comments?
Yeah, you ain't seen nothing yet. I mean, looking at these trends, they were largely evident before the pandemic, which threw gasoline on the fire. Average hourly wages in Berks County are now at $30 an hour. Now that's across all occupations, but that's a number that certainly gets my attention. The other number I'll share with you is a lot of employers, 612. I was so thrilled to hear. I mean, this is a select group of employers who get it and are working ahead of the curve, right? We're trying to stay up with the curve. But many employers think this is a temporary phenomenon that is strictly a function of COVID, but that's clearly not the case. One example I'll give you is, Keith, you'll appreciate this, but Berks County has the highest new hire churn of any labor market in Pennsylvania, by far, like 50% higher than almost anybody else in a metro area. So between April and September of 2021 last year, we hired 30,000 new people into our employers. That's over 15% of our workforce was hired. Stacy, I think some of those people were the same people hired at 2 or 3 different places, right? So when you talk about retention and churn, what we're hearing from employers, it's people don't return your calls for phone screenings. You schedule them for interviews, they don't show up. When they show up for work, they may not last the week. Those folks know that they can go down the road and replace a average job like at 5 other places. So that whole mindset is a whole different ballgame, but got to focus on the retention, particularly within that onboarding process to get them through that first 6 months, because we got to see that churn number coming down, or we're spinning our wheels and the economy's trying to get ahead of us and we're not keeping up. So I hope that's something worth looking at, Keith. And a lot of that churn is in these opportunity occupations.
Thank you, Dan.
The whole thing
Thank
without
you.
saying silver tsunami.
We couldn't get away from you not saying that. Keith, thank you very much. It was a great presentation. Panelists, thank you very much for your willingness to share some really great information. As I mentioned, we will share the video with everybody. We will also share, there's several links that people provided to important things. Keith, you participating in your survey, some other information that you shared with us, some other reports, and a couple other people shared some information. We will make sure everybody gets that as well. We will, as I said, be posting this on the Berks Alliance website and on BCTV. I do want to mention that we have some upcoming programs that I would like to encourage people to come. Ted Freeze has left, but we're going to have EnerSys talking about their work as part of our Spotlight series in terms of charging stations for electric vehicles. We're doing another Spotlight program later in April on a company called Solar Flux, which deals with the solar collection system that's used to generate heat. We're doing another Spotlight series at the beginning of May with Barrio Alegria, talking about their program and community-based work. We're doing a community forum again in April. We're going to move back to the third Thursdays, where we're going to have one on with the reinvestment fund in Philadelphia and the policy map, looking at housing and the data that we know can learn from housing. And then in May, we're going to do a presentation with the county doing its strategic economic development plan. So lots of good stuff coming up, and I think we're going to see Keith Wardrop again in June. So thank you all for joining us today. Hopefully you found this useful and interesting, and you'll come back and see us again sometime for some of these upcoming events. So thank you all.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.